Good afternoon, students, faculty members, parents, members of the Board of Trustees, friends of Stevens, President Farvardin, Provost Pierre. Welcome to 2017 Thomas H. Scholl Lecture by Visiting Entrepreneurs. My name is Mo Degani, and I'm the Vice Provost for Research and Innovation. What a wonderful day it has been, right? As you know, today is the hallmark event for our students, faculty, and for all of us here at Stevens, when once a year we showcase our senior design projects, our faculty and graduate students' ongoing research activities, and our innovation and entrepreneurial spirit that has been the DNA of this wonderful institution. The demand for Stevens education is going through the roof, and today you saw some of the reasons why. The main reason, of course, is the fact that a dedicated group of faculty and administrators under the leadership of President Farvardin and Provost Pierre have made the term student centricity the mantle of their profession. And on a daily basis, they are pushing the education, research, and innovation agendas of this great university daily. The results have been nothing short of astonishing, frankly. Here are some of the rankings by various national ranking organizations. 100% placement of our graduates, with the exception of 2 or 3 who decide to do other things in life, or they've chosen their parents properly and they decide to go tour Europe before they get a job or something. Number 5 in the nation among the private colleges that are worth the price. Number 10 in the nation for 20-year net return on investment. Number 5 in the nation in the category of engineering schools by salary potential. Top university in the Northeast region for salary potential. This is ahead of Princeton, Harvard, MIT, Babson College, and other big-name universities in the region. Among top 50 colleges that create futures. And on. You can see the list on the website. And I encourage you to go look at some of these remarkable statistics that this university has experienced in the last 5, 6, 7 years or so. Today, you are a part of 133 senior design projects from schools of engineering and science, systems and enterprises, business, and the College of Arts and Letters. Many of these projects are sponsored by companies such as L3 Technologies, General Dynamics, Stantec, Moretrench, and L'Oreal, to just name a few. Great majority of these projects are multidisciplinary in nature and the results of collaborative work of over 600 students and more than 80 faculty members from across the campus. You are one of the 660 people that have downloaded our mobile app or viewed our app online. This is the app. You have downloaded it, right? Yes. All right, okay. I hope you had a chance to view and contemplate the information presented on 91 faculty and PhD student posters. In addition to all of this, we hope you have enjoyed the spectacular view of New York City and are ready for the crown jewel event of the day, the Thomas H. Scholl Lecture by Visiting Entrepreneurs. So I would like to introduce a man who epitomizes the concept of entrepreneurship, Mr. Tom Scholl. In addition, In addition to being a member of the Board of Trustees and a benefactor of Stevens, Tom is a successful entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and technology innovator. As a person who has been directly involved with 40 startup companies, Tom takes a very personal interest in the achievements of the Stevens entrepreneurs and inventors. In 2012, he established the Thomas H. Scholl Lecture Series by visiting entrepreneurs, which features notable entrepreneurs and executives whose successful business performances has helped change the world for the better. Scholl received a BA degree in philosophy and literature and an honorary Doctor of Letters from Purdue University. He holds patents related to software and internet and digital telephone systems. He serves as chairman of the Board of Visitors for the University of Maryland's School of Engineering. Without any further delay, I would like to ask Tom to do us the honor of introducing the 2017 Innovation Expo Thomas H. Scholl Lecturer. Tom?
Thank you, Mo. Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Well, for those of you who have been here since 2012, we've had some really great speakers. And today, we're going to have another fantastic, great speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for coming, and I'm sure you're going to have an enjoyable time. I'm very pleased to be with you today to introduce our guest speaker, Tim Urban, one of the internet's most engaging celebrities and the creator of the blog called Wait But Why. Tim started the blog in 2013, not very long ago, to offer astute as well as entertaining commentary accompanied by stick figures, illustrations that address a variety of topics, ranging from why we procrastinate to why artificial intelligence is scary, or why we haven't seen any signs of aliens so far. His articles have been regularly republished on sites such as Quartz, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, Time, Business Insider, and Gizmodo. In 2015, Fast Company wrote that Wait But Why is disproving the notion that thoughtful, long-form content and virality are mutually exclusive. And for anyone who's gone to the website, you know that Tim is a thinker, something really refreshing in these days, I think. Today, Wait But Why receives more than 1.5 million unique visitors per month, on average, with some months visitors topping out over 10 million. And the blog has over 500,000 email subscribers. The Wait But Why community of readers is also highly engaged, with every article generating thoughtful, intelligent reader comments, sometimes reaching into the thousands. Tim is a Harvard graduate with a degree in government, but he's joining us here at Stevens for his third time. So we've got Tim as an advocate and a friend of Stevens, and we hope he'll be back even more. The intriguing title of Tim's talk is The Cook and the Chef, What We Can Learn from How Elon Musk Thinks. Now, when you meet Tim, what you're going to find out is at the same time, we're all going to also learn how Tim thinks. So I am most honored to introduce our speaker. I would be very grateful if you would help me welcome him to the stage and look forward to his fascinating lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Urban.
Thank you, Tom. This is exciting to be here. So I've changed the title because I did that thing where I put in like 40 other slides because I'm like, oh, I want to say all those things. So we have a lot of things to talk about right now. I'll start a little bit about kind of how I got into this and the path of Wait But Why so far. And then we'll move on to some kind of bigger thoughts on entrepreneurship and life and everything. So I started blogging actually like in 2005 as a complete side project. My friend had a Blogspot blog, and I couldn't believe he figured out how to get something onto the internet. That was like shocking at the time. And he explained that I thought he had to be like a coder or something, but he was like, you can just kind of do this as a service blogger. Shocking. So I started a blog and I started writing stuff. This was my first post. It was about a dog that lived kind of across me, and he could across this little courtyard, and the dog would like look at me, and I would kind of do I would do something weird, like I'd go like, and the dog would start freaking out, and then the owners would turn, and I would just be like, and then they'd look away, and I'd be like, and the dog would start going crazy, and then the owners would turn, and I would kind of be doing my own thing, and they'd say, "I'm sorry," and they put the dog in the bedroom, and it was just kind of a fun game for me. So I wrote about that. I got into other things. I wrote this was like I think my second post. This is the kind of stuff you expect from when you have Tom invites a lecturer. A little while later, so I wrote, and I had a little dedicated audience, but nothing. It didn't pop. Nothing big. In the middle, I figured out another tool. I kind of started experimenting. I was very open-minded about what, this is just my own platform. I have no rules. I can do whatever I want. So I started drawing, and I was like, so what if I just drew? I'm a horrible artist, but I'm like, the stick figures are easy. You don't have to be a good artist to be. What if I did, draw? So I tried to do things like I had a beard at the time, a little scruffy thing, and I said it kind of felt like this when I touched it. That's how I thought everything kind of was when I touched it, but then it was actually kind of like that. And so I found it was a good way to express myself. I couldn't, I could explain that in words, but it was like easier just to draw exactly how it really felt to me. And so I was having fun with it, and I decided in 2013, what if I took this like seriously? What if I made this my full-time job and just started blogging 60 hours a week instead of about 4 hours a week? And I had built another business in the world of test prep, SATs, stuff like that, had enough going on that it could support me while I started this project. So I started Wait But Why. And yeah, I just said, I'm just gonna do the same thing I'm doing, writing about what I wanna write about, but I'm gonna give it my all. And I'm the same kind of thing. I'm not gonna worry about rules. I'm not gonna, blogging is not normal journalism. I'm not gonna try to be a journalist. I'm not gonna try to do anything normally. I found that in the old blog, the posts that people seemed to like the most were just me kind of doing my thing and not trying to conform to something. So I kept doing that. And I kept drawing, because I thought that was kind of a fun way to express stuff still. So I got into important things like the handshake, hug, death clash that you can get into. This happens. You go for the handshake, someone else goes for the hug, and then you have this very upsetting moment for both people, and you have to kind of wrote about like when you're like with someone and kind of have a nice time, and you're like, okay, well I'm gonna go now, bye, and then everything's good, and then you're walking the same direction, and it's horrible. I got into some deeper stuff, like relationships, and why there are so many relationships that aren't great. I see so many relationships that just aren't. Why is this the thing that you're doing? It doesn't make sense. A lot of marriages don't seem to be quite right. And I wanted to get into what's the psychology going on there? I wanted to get into some existential stuff about life, got deeper. So this is every week of a human life, a 90-year life on one thing here to give you some existential angst. And it's like you can just see them all. That's it. Why can all the weeks fit there? They shouldn't, but they do, and it's the whole thing, and you go into your head about that. And I got more existential. I started to get into, as my kind of confidence grew, I was like, I can, write about serious things too. I wanted to get into stuff like, the big things that matter. So I actually wrote about AI, a 25,000 word post on AI. This was another rule I broke because you're not supposed to write long things on the internet. No one reads long things, is what people told me. But when I wrote long things, I found that wasn't true. If they're engaging and there's headings and visuals and it's written colloquially, people actually might read long things. So I went into it and I didn't worry about length. And what I found is when I read about AI, that the unsatisfying thing was that there were either these 800-word, Tech Insider articles, Gizmodo articles explaining things, which are good they have a purpose, but I never quite could understand it with an 800-word thing. Or there's these books. And it's like, well, okay, that's a big commitment though. And so I thought that something in the middle, again, this is not like an area that exists, this 25,000-word online free thing. It's not really a thing. But why not? Why not try it? Because I knew I would want that. If I were a reader, I would love if someone sent that exact thing to me. I don't want to read the book, but I want an engaging kind of, visual, but thorough explainer. So I did that. And I wrote about stuff like, I kind of got into the concept of how intense AI really is, in that right now it's this narrow intelligence type thing. It can do one thing really well. It can do its task really, really well, much smarter than a human at its one thing, but it doesn't have the breadth that we have. It's not smart in the way a human is smart. When that changes and AI can start to be better at us at being not good at one or two things, but being smart. It's as good as being smart as a calculator as at multiplying big numbers. In a broad way, that's very intense. And you can imagine this kind of small difference between a monkey and a human. I'm going to use this feature because I just got this thing. Yes. So you have a two-step difference here between a monkey and a human. And yet, we can build, airplanes. And a monkey, not only can a monkey not make an airplane, I was just on the other night, I was out looking at the stars, and there's all these other things going around in the sky if you just look up. So all these little blinking things and satellites and planes, and I'm thinking, how smart are we that humans can put lights in the sky? That's unbelievably advanced. How far is a chimp from being able to do that? A chimp can definitely not put stuff in the sky. They can't even understand that we put stuff in the sky if we tried to explain it. So if you extrapolate that out, well, when there's AI, which could happen in 20, 30 years, artificial superintelligence that is not just as smart as a human across the board, but smarter, maybe on this step here, a couple steps up. Well, what's the analogy between a monkey doing what it can do to putting lights in the sky? Well, lights in the sky to blank, something that is so advanced we couldn't even understand that they did it. Pretty intense concept, especially when you consider that once something is there and it can improve itself, and artificial superintelligence can actually start to code itself to be smarter, you could very quickly end up here, where that's the last slide over here, and now, it's up here. So, intense. So I got into stuff like this on the blog. Really fun, writing about this stuff. And I found that long post was a great medium for this. And, and there were readers, including, I picked up the phone one day, and it was Elon Musk's person asking if maybe I would like to, she was just hilarious. She was like, Elon is interested in maybe, talking about some of the stuff he's working on. If you want to write about that, that would be cool. If you have any time, I know you're busy. She was like, is any, and I'm thinking literally my child can be being born, my child can be falling off a cliff, and I have to just reach over and catch it, but this is the exact time when he wants to talk, I'll let the child go, and I'll take the call. I was like, I'm available, you tell me. So, the time my head fell off, because you're not expecting Elon Musk to call, gathered myself, got things together, and got on the phone with him a few days later, and we talked about his companies. And there was a lot to talk about. And he kind of said, well, why don't you come out and see the factories, and we can chat more. Again, there's nothing I will not cancel. So I'm out in California checking out the Tesla factory, the incredibly rad SpaceX factory, meeting with him. Somehow even more awkward in person. But we had a really awesome discussion. And we talked a lot about the big picture. The big zoomed out picture of what this dude is doing. And I kind of came out of this with two goals. The first goal is the one that he's interested in me having, which is to think about and explain why he's doing what he's doing. People kind of understand what he's doing, but what matters to him are the reasons that he's doing it. And that, in the 800-word Tech Insider article, you're not going to get that. You're just not. There's no way to explain something that broad and complicated in 800 words, but no one's really writing a book on this stuff. Maybe there's his bio, which was just in the process of coming out, but that's about him. And he really wanted someone to basically write a bio of these companies, and really the industries that he's involved in and the reasons behind those. So really zoomed out stuff. So again, I thought about how, if you want to understand why he's building this car, and why he's building this rocket, and that's the house. This is not a small rocket. That's a house. Damn this thing. Elon can build this rocket, and I can't figure out how to do the spotlight thing. So there's a house and a guy, and this is a 40-story skyscraper. And that top part is the 16-story skyscraper-sized spaceship that gets pinged into orbit by the big thing, and that can hold 300 people, takes us to Mars. Pretty rad, but why? Why are you doing this? People always ask, there's so many problems on Earth. Why are you trying to go to Mars? Or, Tesla, you building toys for rich people. And so I said, if we want to get this, we have to do a big zoom out. So that's what I did. And I started to realize these two companies actually are very similar when you really take a big zoom out, even though they don't seem similar at all. And I started thinking about, is there a formula? Is there, what is he, and I kind of saw all these parallels. I realized there is a formula to what he's doing. He has an Elon Musk kind of pattern that if you just zoom out and look at both really hard, you say, okay, wait a second, this is the same thing. And here's what I kind of discovered, that he always starts with the initial goal, which is what drives every ounce of motivation in his body, is how do we get an increased chance of a good future? He's always talking in probabilities. We don't ensure a good future. How do we just do something that increases the probability that we have a good future and not some kind of terrible existential problem? So then he goes and says, well, what are some major changes in the world that would really give us a better probability, to really up that probability? Well, what are the things that are endangering us, and how can we do something to change it? That something becomes his goal. So he comes up with some goal. If we can just make this change in the world, it'll have this result, which will give us an increased chance of a good future. Now, a goal like that, of change in the world that's big, one company never does that. It's not possible. Doesn't matter how amazing the company is. It's very rare that one company can really make a change that will change the course of humanity on its own. What changes the course of humanity is when the entire industry, when the entire species starts working towards something. To get to that, you need something that every time there has been an industry that has changed the world, like the auto industry or many other industries, it starts because this is what one company can do, is they can create some kind of innovation that makes the industry take off. Kind of like a match that can light a bunch of logs on fire. So, a lot of these industries are logs kind of waiting to catch on fire, and the thing that needs to happen is a match that can do it. So in the Industrial Revolution, it took off when it did for a reason, because suddenly we had the steam engine. We could make locomotives and steamships. We could transport way more stuff, way longer distances, way faster. We could have steam-powered machines in our factories, and a million billion other innovations then sprung from that. The species turned its attention to industry because the steam engine gave it an incentive to. Same idea, electricity revolution in the 1880s. Suddenly electricity is harnessed. We can use it for all different kinds of things. What do you know? We first have the telegraph. Before that, then we end up with the telephone, and you can have a motion picture, and eventually you get to radio and TV. None of that happens if we don't know how to harness electricity. And the computer revolution. You have the transistor and you have the integrated circuit. Those two things don't happen. The computers aren't where they are today. The thing that made computers take over the world was not the invention of the computer. It was the invention of the thing that allowed for a Moore's Law thing to start happening, that allowed for computers to go from the size of this building to in your pocket. That was the match that made everyone say, whoa, there's a lot of opportunity here. This is moving quickly, and then the whole industry, the whole species turns its attention to it. So Elon's always thinking, for the change he wants to make, what's the match that's going to get the world to do this change that I want it to do? Now, how do you do the match? The match, once he thinks about, well, I think I know what we need to do here, that's where the company comes in. That's what he builds a company to do, to try to make the innovation that will create a match that will light a bunch of logs on fire, that will change the world in a way that increases the probability of a good future. And finally, how do you innovate? Innovation takes lots of smart people, lots of time, lots of money. You need something sustainable, right? No one's going to fund that. So you need a sustainable business model that you can use as a tool to innovate, and also as a way to sustain the innovation over time. So that's kind of it. I realized and if you look at SpaceX and Tesla and everything he's doing, it fits into this formula, which means if you want to understand an Elon Musk company, you have to answer these 4 question marks. It's always going to be, what are the 4 question marks? And when you get those, you get the company. So for Tesla, it's pretty simple. Right now, everyone drives a gas car. So he wants to make and sell cars which can sustain innovation in the electric car industry, that can bring the cost of electric cars down, build the gigafactory and multiple battery factories, innovate in all kinds of ways that can create this super affordable, unbelievably popular electric car, kind of the iPhone of cars, that suddenly no one wants their flip phone anymore because now you can all have an iPhone, and now every company has to scramble to make an iPhone. Same idea. He wants to make an electric car so good that no one wants their gas car anymore. What will happen then? Of course, the industry will, whether they like it or not, and they don't like it, they will dive headfirst in to create an amazing electric car of their own, and now you have the whole world working on this problem, which leads to the eventual goal of an accelerated advent of a sustainable energy world. It helps get us there faster, which is really important because it reduces the risk of an environmental or economic catastrophe related to fossil fuels and all of that, which pretty naturally would probably increase the chance of a good future. Makes sense. For SpaceX, well, we have all our eggs on one planet. Something bad happens here, an asteroid or some massive world war. We can't go anywhere, and this could be the end of humanity. This doesn't ensure that humanity is safe, but if we can get ourselves onto multiple planets, that would seriously help. Okay, so you have to create. The sustainable business model is you learn how to deliver things to orbit. So you can deliver stuff for NASA or for satellite companies. That funds innovation that can learn to land a rocket, which I assume a lot of you have seen videos at this point of a SpaceX rocket landing like a real species. I mean, if an alien came down crashed into the ocean and then parachuted and then swam to shore, it's not intimidating. It's not very effective. An alien lands, like an adult. And now Elon and SpaceX have learned to do that. And what does that mean? Well, if every time you flew an airplane, you had to throw it away after and build a new one, it would cost about $5 million for a coach ticket. And we wouldn't have an airline industry, so same idea here. If you can land rockets, we suddenly have we're a spacefaring civilization. What does that mean? It means that we have a match that ignites a pile of logs on fire. All this innovation, all the entrepreneurs will start turning their attention to how can I make money off this? The satellite companies will start popping up, really innovative, different things to use in low Earth orbit, and big major industrial rocket building companies that'll make that 40-story rocket look tiny, and people who want to develop stuff on Mars. You can create a cargo route to Mars, all because you learn how to reduce the cost of space travel. Now you have an industry. Eventually, what will that lead to? That will lead to human life is sustainably multiplanetary. He believes he's going to establish a cargo route and a human transit route to Mars, which will, for different reasons, entrepreneurs will find reasons that they want to go and develop there. And countries will too. That will lead to life insurance for the species. If something happens on one planet, well, there's a sustainable species in another somewhere else as well. And eventually you have which reduces existential risk and increases the probability for a good future. So when I recently, after this, wrote about a bunch of other things, then a couple months ago, Elon's people got in touch and said, there's a new Elon company called Neuralink. Would you like to kind of write about it? Is that interesting to you? And I said yes, obviously, because what's so cool. But he's building, this was extra weird. He's building a whole brain interface that it just seems so out there. And I kind of said, why and how are you doing? And again, I had those questions, and so what did I do? I zoomed out and I started looking, what are those 4 question marks? Because I know why he's doing it. He's doing this somehow to increase the probability of a good future. And I just had to figure out what goes in those boxes. And so after about 2 months of research and talking to him and his team, I figured it out and wrote a 38,000-word post that I could talk for 2 hours about right now, but Tom will kill me, so we're going to just talk for a second, and there's a lot more of that on the blog if you're interested. But in other words, here, what the boxes are filled with, the sustainable business model is brain-machine interfaces, like a cochlear implant to help a deaf person hear, or a motor cortex electrodes that can help a paralyzed person move a bionic arm, things like that. Simple brain-machine interfaces, develop really good ones. That can sustain innovation so that Neuralink can figure out the match here. The match here is that right now, we can put 100 electrodes in the brain at once, maybe 200. We can measure the activity of maybe 500 neurons at once in a human being. There are 100 billion neurons in the brain, so that's not very much. That's very low-res information we're going to get in or out. So what do you need? You need to get that number from 100 electrodes to more like 1 million. And you don't do that by just brute forcing that. You need some kind of Moore's law situation. You need the integrated circuit of this industry. How do we create something where suddenly this number is going up quickly? Secondly, no one wants skull opening surgery. You need to figure out a way to implant this in a safe way, in a non-invasive way. And those 2 things is what Neuralink is really trying to figure out. So people who don't get it will look at the company and say, oh, they develop things to help people with strokes. No, they don't. That's what they do to fund what they're really trying to do, which is something that will help a lot more people than that if they can do it. So that's the match. I think they can light the logs on fire. The whole world will start pouring their time and money into building amazing hardware that can go into the brain, amazing software that it can communicate with, machine learning that can understand the signals coming out of the brain, 1 million neurons, or maybe 100 million neurons, all talking at once in this rapid fire, 100 times a second static. No human's gonna know what the hell that means. You're gonna have to have great machine learning. All of these industries will have financial incentive to do this stuff, which will lead to what he believes and hopes will be a mass adoption of what I call a wizard hat, because that's basically what it is, but it's a whole brain interface, something that really allows most of the neurons in your brain to communicate with the outside world back and forth. And he believes, for a lot of reasons that I don't have time to explain now, that is going to actually lead to human AI integration, which is why he's really doing this. Even though the whole brain interface can change our lives in a million ways, it's the integration with AI that makes him want to do this, because he believes that if we can have a high bandwidth connection to AI, we will have an AI layer basically in our minds that is as much us as our cortex and our limbic system are right now, and that we will think with AI. And he thinks that if all of us can be Superman, then that's okay. It's when there's one company that develops AI and we don't have access to it, and there's one Superman, we don't want one Superman. You don't want to be a human on Krypton, but you don't want to be a human on the Earth when there's one Superman either. What you want to be is a Superman on Krypton or a Superman on Earth when there's lots of Supermen. I regret getting into that last whole section. You get what I'm saying. And he thinks that it can reduce risk for many different reasons. Again, this was some deep stuff. I had to really talk to him, really think. I had to look back at what he said, read the transcription, try to understand. But I think I started to click by the end about why this makes sense. Because he's thinking about a future. He's taking precautions for a future that's not here. And our brains are, wired to understand a future, present that is here. So but he can think, in these ways that when you think about it hard enough, you say, yeah, you know what? In that future, this might be critical. And I think he thinks it is. So, again, he doesn't claim this is going to solve all our problems. He thinks it'll just give us an increased chance of a good future. So that's this first thing. Why is he doing what he's doing? And I think there's so much to learn from this, just to understand the concept of zooming out and how effective it is. So that's when I turned to the second question that I had, that he was less concerned about, but I had this question. Okay, why is this guy able to do this stuff? None of you can do that stuff. I can't do that stuff. How can he do 3 companies like that while building this tunnel system and OpenAI, this others AI platform, while kind of jump-starting the Hyperloop concept? What's going on? It's like I feel like these people that don't come along that often, these people are worth studying. What can we learn, right? It's not magic. There's just something. So what did I do to understand this? I zoomed out. I did the same thing I do to understand his companies. I did it with understanding him and his effectiveness. I zoomed way out and listened to kind of the way he talks, the way he thinks. Because at this point, I have had the luxury, the awesome opportunity I've had a lot of time to chat with him. And so I've had a lot of time to kind of analyze what he's doing differently than we are. And I think I have an idea. So I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly. Let's just first talk about mid-1600s. 2 different kinds of geologists are studying the Grand Canyon. One says, well, we know that the Earth started 6,000 years ago. That's what the Bible tells us. So that's for sure. And now we can try to reconcile what we see and observe with that fact, and eventually we'll discover it. And so they would come up with all these different explanations for, there's fossils in the Grand Canyon. It must be because of the flood, and they would do these things. But the Earth being 6,000 years old was set in stone. Then there were the geologists who said, look, we don't know anything. Let's not assume or believe anything unless we observe it. And so they had the liberty to kind of take what they observed and actually just look at that for what it was with no other information. And very quickly, the age of the Earth for these people went way back. Thousands of years, millions of years, 5 billion years. Today, we know that that second group is right. And I bet most people, especially in a room like this, whether you're religious or not, identify when it comes to something like looking at the Grand Canyon, identify with the second group. You say, well, yeah, of course. I'm science-minded. Obviously, I would be one of the second group people. I feel the same way. And yet, I think many of us, most of us, in many, many parts of our lives, critical parts of our lives, are much more like the flood geologists than the science geologists. So to understand kind of why and how that makes sense, think about our brain the way Elon thinks of it. He thinks of people as computers. You know, when he looks at his kids, he sees 5 of his favorite computers. And he really does talk about humans are computers, they process information, and he talks about hardware and software in the brain all the time. And I noticed that other people, I have had a chance to, little name drop, to also work with Mark Zuckerberg recently, and he's talking about how lossy the information is in language. I'm thinking, lossy is not a word you people. I'm learning that these high-level thinkers often see humans for what they really are, which is computers in many ways. So to understand, how a computer works, you have to know the difference between software and hardware, but we don't think of it that way. We think of it, this is my mind. It just is what it is. It's my mind. It's it's mine I was born with, and I can learn, but it's my mind. Actually, there's the mind you're born with is your hardware. Not all hardware is equal, and we know that. And but a lot of what you become, a lot of what your mind becomes, and the way you think, comes down to your software, which is this. If what you're born with is a ball of clay, the software is the tool that it's shaped into. Okay, and the software is how we think, not our raw capability, but it's the way our mind works. So this is a very zany looking diagram, but this is how I think Elon thinks. And it looks complicated, but it's actually quite elegant and simple. You have this blue box, his want box, what he wants to do, his objectives, if he could do anything. Then you have reality, what is possible, everything that's possible. And the intersection of those are his options for his own goals. Okay? So when he wants to start SpaceX, his reality box, he looked at it and said, yeah, I think this is in my reality box. I think we can figure out how to do this as a company. Everyone else is saying that's insane. No billionaire has ever succeeded. You're not going to either. He said, well, it's in my reality box. So it was in his gold pool, and he could choose it, and then you build a strategy. And your strategy for SpaceX was, doing all the things they're doing to innovate, and the big picture strategy of trying to land rockets and hoping that'll do the job. But he doesn't stop there. Each one of these 3 rectangles, these 3 boxes, they're part of a fluid system of looking at evidence of results, reevaluating, and iterating and changing based on what you see, based on the world. That's what a scientist does. Science experiments, all 3 of these. Each one is a hypothesis, constantly evolving based on new evidence. So you change, you reflect on that, you adjust what you want. The world changes, you adjust in real time. And your reality box oozes and changes. A lot of people start stuff now that seem like crazy visionaries, but actually they're just starting stuff that is reality today, and it wasn't 15 years ago, but the world hasn't caught on yet. And finally, of course, strategy itself. A good scientist is always adjusting what they're doing, which means they love negative feedback because that's information. It's critical, helpful information. And finally, the big red arrows. Well, down below, if the world and you are changing enough, you might have different goals. Those goals might change. You don't just stick with one thing for 40 years. You might want to change your direction if those things below suggest you should. Seems so logical, right? He's just being a scientist. That's all he's being. He's being a scientist about everything, and yet we really don't do this. We don't do this in so many different ways. So you can kind of sum up the concept of, Elon and a lot of people who are super crazy world-changing. They reason from first principles, like a physicist. It's a physics term. You look at the axioms and the theories you have, and you build upwards from there. And you don't build a conclusion, or you don't build a law or a fact in physics. You build a theory, and that theory has those arrows. New evidence comes in, great. Let's adjust the tower. Oh, the conclusion has changed. That's how a scientist thinks. That's how Elon thinks all the time. Okay, most of us think more by analogy. We reason by analogy, meaning we say, well, if no one's ever built it, no billionaire has ever succeeded at a rocket company, I'm not going to either. Well, let's just be realistic. If someone could have, someone would have. Okay, and we do this all the time. We say, well, I want to do this. That's a normal job. That's kind of like no one does that job, so I'm not going to do that. And we do this all the time. And why? Why do we so beholden to reasoning by analogy? Well, you have to look at the way we were raised. In our society, kids play the why game, right? They say, well, put your boots on. Why? Because it's cold outside. Why? Because it's the winter. Why? Because the planet's angled like that. Why? Because the gravity and you go on forever. And maybe the first few times it's cute. Your kid's, look, he's curious. By the 7th time, you're like, I'm going to murder you now. So you're going to put your boots on right now because I said so. Because I said so is the concrete floor under which no further whys may pass. It's what we hear in school. It's what we hear at home. It's what we hear from society. Okay? Because some authority that's smarter than you said so, don't hurt yourself trying to reason here. 'Cause what's the kid trying to do when he plays the why game? Actually, a very healthy instinct. Hearing a conclusion, well, let me unpack that. Let me break down the reasoning that built that conclusion so I can understand why this makes sense. And parents don't want to deal with it. So they train kids, don't do that, obey. You hear the conclusion, that's teaching a kid to reason by analogy. And if you think about how silly this is, how would this go over in the science world? So there's Stephen Hawking, and so he's hanging out, and Dyson comes in, his old friend. He says, oh, hey, and Dyson says, no, listen, I just proven string theory. And Hawking's like, well, how the hell did you do that? And he's like, I just did. And then Hawking's like, right, but why is that definitely true? He said, because I said so. He's like, the fuck is going on? Wouldn't fly in the science world. That's not real reasoning. But we're expected to reason like that all the time. Society said so. Or lots of other authorities. A famous quote said so. The media said so. My culture said so. My professor said so. Conventional wisdom says so. My dad says so. Whatever it is, we get addicted because we're taught this. All we know is I need to find someone who said so I know what to do. And without realizing that's what we're doing. But if you play the why game with your own choices in life and your own assumptions and your own opinions, you often will get to a very foggy place because there aren't first principles down there that you came up with. Someone else said so is where you're going to get to, and you realize it's, because my tribe says so. That's actually why I think that, not because you're going to find that you're doing a lot of this without realizing it. So I call this concept of reasoning by first principles or analogy cooks and chefs. We use these words interchangeably in real life, but the way I like to think about it is a chef writes the recipe, cook follows the recipe. The first principles for a chef are raw ingredients. Let's puzzle. Let's see what comes out. We're going to make some really bad food, but we're going to stumble across some good things. We're going to learn. We're going to taste it. We're going to get better. And a cook just says, what does the recipe say? That's the authority. That's the Bible for a cook. So you have to think about, what kind of Bibles are we all following? And so many of, what Elon doesn't do is he just doesn't listen to Bibles. No matter how much 99% of people believe them, if his reasoning tells him something that the Bible doesn't say, he says, well, the Bible's probably wrong, I guess, then, or at least it's worth experimenting whether it is. That's what the science geologists did. They said, well, the Bible says that, but maybe the Bible's wrong, and that maybe the Bible's wrong, and their confidence in their own reasoning abilities was what led them to be able to get to truth, to actually get somewhere. And the adherence to the Bible by the flood geologists was what held them back. And I think in many cases, it's what holds us back. When Elon puts down his Bible and starts doing stuff, you can see what happens. And yes, Elon's really smart. He's really ambitious and really, hardworking. So are a lot of people. If that's all it was, there'd be a lot more Elon Musks. There's something else going on. It's the same thing I see in Steve Jobs. It's the same thing I see in John Lennon. It's the same thing I see in the American forefathers who didn't say, well, what kind of king should we have? They said, let's put down that Bible for a second. Should we have a king? What should a country be? So I think I see cooks and chefs in all of these different industries. Really, any industry you can think of. When you think about a real disruptor, there's some element of reasoning from first principles going on. There's some chef in the heart of that disruption. That's what creates a real disruption. Because think about it, if you're following conventional wisdom, how can you disrupt anything? You are being the thing. You can't disrupt the thing if you're trying to be the thing. I tried to analyze what can we do with this information? Other than, I think the first step is, if you want to be more chef-like, just being aware of the distinction between a cook and a chef, just thinking about this. And self-analyzing, which is not going to be that fun, because you're going to realize all these times when you're being a cook. Now, to be clear, being a cook makes sense most of the time. Reasoning by analogy is an evolutionary advantage. It's a trick to save time. Why should I innovate on my clothing when I can basically copy what I think other people like me are supposed to wear? I don't care about clothes. It's not important to me. So I'm just going to reason by analogy. I'm going to buy a Mac because that's what my friends are doing. I'm going to reason by analogy because it doesn't matter. But when something matters, like your career choices or your choice of spouse or the way you raise your kids, that matters. And it's a massive mistake there to not do the hard work of being a chef. So we need to learn how to pull out the chef in us when we need to, which the first step is understanding the difference, because we don't realize this is even happening because we mistake cooks for chefs. We see a leader who's actually following a bunch of guidelines and they're not really disrupting anything. We see a great chef. They're not really a chef. So what we do is, and then likewise, when we see a real chef like Elon, we mistake what he's doing for genius, for some raw hardware thing that we simply don't have. Okay, people say that. I could never, he's just a smart. Henry Ford, these people, Marie Curie, I just don't have that brain. Actually, it's usually that, it's not usually that they would crush you on the IQ test. So one thing we do is, remember that reality box? You have the want box and the reality box? Well, one thing I think we do is we mistake the chef's clear view of the present we see that as vision into the future, because we're all 50 years behind. Because what happens is, so we see this like this, okay? This is a normal box, and he can somehow see magic. Actually, what's happening is he's seeing what's real today. He's current. He's live streaming reality into his brain. We are listening to conventional wisdom a lot, which is usually 10 or 50, sometimes 50 years behind about everything. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is we mistake the chef's accurate understanding of risk for courage. We say, oh my God, I don't have Elon put all of his PayPal money down on SpaceX. Who would do that? No one would do that. It's crazy. But actually, if you think about what Elon said as a kid, he has this quote. He said, when I was a kid, I was really scared of the dark, but then I came to understand dark just means the absence of photons in the visible wavelength. Then I thought, well, it's really silly to be scared of absence of photons, and I wasn't scared of the dark anymore. He actually told a 7-year-old girl this on the playground when she asked him, what a psycho! Like, she must have been like, dude, this is a lot right now that you're giving me here. But what we see is the little girl. We say, well, it's cute she's scared of the dark. She doesn't get it yet. And Elon, look at him. He understands what it really is. That's good for him, right? And yet today when he says this quote, this is another quote of his, sometimes people fear starting a company too much. Really, what's the worst that could go wrong? You're not going to starve to death. You're not going to die of exposure. What's the worst that could go wrong? That's the same quote as the photons quote, except here we are the little girl. We are the 7-year-old here. Because he sees it and he looks at these people that are scared to start something and says, what's really going to happen? You're not going to die. Actually, you're going to deal with a bunch of first world problems probably. It's not really risky. It's not real danger involved. There's perceived danger because society thinks it's just a bunch of perceptions that aren't actually based in reality. I actually looked at something, I think about this as the danger scale, where there's some stuff that's actually dangerous, of course. But the public considers safety to be way down at the bottom when actually this whole middle area is still safe. It seems scary, but it's safe, and that's where the chefs beat all of us. That's the chef lab. That's where they go, and they create the kind of companies and the ideas and the art and the thought leadership that we are too scared to build because we have this inaccurate perception of danger in our heads. Okay, and finally, we mistake originality for brilliant ingenuity. Even the word original sounds so smart to us, but original just means you're just doing stuff that's new. So a real chef with food an original chef is gonna create a bunch of bad food, a lot of failures, but they're gonna create some awesome stuff along the way, and then they're gonna seem like geniuses, but actually they're just being original, which just means they put the Bible down. Steve Jobs didn't say, what kind of keyboard are we gonna make on this new phone? It's gonna be an Apple-y keyboard. No, he said, put the Bible down, now what should a mobile device be? And they started reasoning upwards, some first principles. When they got to the top, there was no keyboard because it didn't make sense. iPhone isn't that genius an idea. It just required someone to stop reading the Bible of what all the other companies were doing. Everyone has a keyboard. And shockingly, it worked. And people see it as genius, but really it's just someone being original, which is very rare. So how to be a chef? We need 3 epiphanies. First one is that you don't know shit. That's you, the sad guy on the ground. You need to, we have our own, the first Bible is our own assumptions, our own adherence, blind adherence to these Bibles as truth. We need to stop and say, I don't know what I think I know, because most of it is based, dig down, in someone who said so. So let's just step back and say we don't know what we think we know. Humility. Humility is a starting point for very awesome journeys by chefs. But you're not going to go anywhere if those people are laughing at you because you think, well, they know stuff and I don't. Actually, they don't know shit either. Okay? That's key. You need to take the first one with the second one. Steve Jobs said it. Well, he said, I don't know what a phone should be. I need to think about this. But he said, but they don't know either. There's no way they know better than I do. Elon said, I don't know how to build a rocket company yet, but NASA and the Soviet Union tried for decades to land a rocket. They couldn't. He said, whatever, they don't know either. So I'm as good a person as any to try to figure it out. So the first one, you can see all these people who said they don't know shit in different ways. Isaac Newton, he's a child on the beach while vast oceans of truth lie undiscovered before him. Feynman loves to talk about how little he knows. Elon says you should take the approach that you're wrong, your goal is to be less wrong. But this goes along with their confidence that no one else knows either. Steve Jobs' famous quote, everything around you that you call life was made up by people that are no smarter than you. This is not all here because there's some smarter force in action. Actually, no one really knows stuff. Okay? And finally, when you take those two, you have humility to have a clean slate. You have the confidence to start using your reasoning and trusting it. You then still sometimes just don't act. It's hard to jump off the cliff. We have this fear in us. So the final thing is just to remember that the absence of photons isn't scary. Okay? You need to just absorb this fact that so much of what we're scared to do is based on tribal fears of being not accepted by a tribe, because back then that might kill you, because you might be kicked out of the tribe, and that's not good. We don't live in that world anymore. So much of our fears is tribal, is the limbic system not getting the world. We can't trust that. We have to think, and Elon has this ability to ignore that part of his brain that thinks it's a tribal world, because it's not a tribal world. We need to just try to do that. Again, you can see all these quotes of people saying the absence of photons isn't scary. Failure, failure, failure. I mean, it's annoying watching all these successful people. Their favorite thing is to talk about how much they love failure. But the truth is, there's something to it. I love the Churchill quote, success is going from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. It's simply the opportunity to begin again this time. And when those people succeed, who cares about their failures? It's true, it wasn't really as scary as it seemed at the time. So I think the takeaway for me is that the good news is that what separates Elon from us, the reason he's able to do what he's doing is not because he's a genius, because that would be bad, because I'm not a genius, and that means I can't do what he does. And it means I can't disrupt the way he does. When you realize that Steve Jobs isn't a genius, or that Elon is not, it's not his raw intelligence that's the reason he's doing this, you start to realize if it's our software, well, we can change that. If it's the way we think, we can change that. And the fact is, they're actually just being logical, like the science geologists. If we can just put down the Bible, it's amazing the kind of things we can do. And it matters in career, and it matters in life. It matters in your life choices. How many of us go on with the Bible says, work hard, do this thing, and you realize then your grandmother dies, and I should have spent more time with her. My first principles reasoning would have told me that, but I wasn't listening to it. This comes up again and again and again and again. So that's my takeaway from this. And Tom, asked me to talk about, well, how did Wait But Why succeed? And I know Elon, and I never will be, but I will say that it was the ability to kind of think like a chef in starting a blog and say, the Bible said you can't write long blog posts, and I said, well, maybe you can. And the Bible says you're a terrible artist. That's definitely not a good thing to bring into this. And I said, well, maybe it's like funny when you're a bad artist. And the Bible said, well, you write about this. You write about funny things. You can't start writing about serious things. And I said, well, and it was the fact that it was a blog medium made me not feel like I had to be a journalist. It was my ability to break the rules based on this rule-breaking medium I was working on that I think allowed me to really achieve my potential there, or be on the way to. And so I hope whatever you guys are doing, you can think like a chef about it and realize that, there's no good reason to not be a little bit more like Elon. So thank you. The world's already working on AI, but it could go to a whole new level if someone figures out kind of a way to create a faster path to general intelligence, or if someone can create general intelligence. My God. But that match might have already been created. That's why there's so many people working on it. I think, and I'm saying this partially because I'm biased, because I just was working in this for the last 2 months, but this brain stuff, no one's working on it now because who wants to deal with the incredibly complex brain, our incredible lack of understanding about it, and the fact that how you're going to experiment on human brains. I mean, very few people are going to let you do that, and the FDA won't let you do that. an innovation or two there could start to change that, and that could become the industry of the future, maybe alongside AI. So I think that's one. I think, things in gene editing. I mean, you could go from a world where maybe 1 in 100 of you is planning on working in gene editing, and it might be more like 25 of you in 10 years because some development is allowing this to be practical for normal people. So I wouldn't say I have a prediction as much as the broad prediction that their matches will happen. Every time you never think about the future matches. You look at the past, you say, well, of course, we needed that. But you forget the fact that there's going to be matches in the future that will blow your mind that no one expects now unless you're thinking, outside conventional wisdom about it. Yeah. Education is a classic place where everyone is reading the same Bible that was written in like 1780. We live in the Victorian system. Why are we all doing this exact curriculum the same way? Because the colleges are also doing the Bible, and they say, well, that's what we want on our transcripts. And then the jobs are saying, well, we want these colleges on our transcripts. And it's this mess of reasoning by analogy right now. And it's horrible for our kids who are not being prepared for the world of today. So I think we desperately need chefs here. So not surprisingly, Elon has kids, and he says, well, I'm not sending them to this cook school. So he sets up a world where in the school, and this is something I think is needed in all schools, where application is valued over memorization. So you don't learn, instead of saying, well, here's a diagram of a car, and there's a screwdriver you use for this, and then there's a hammer you use for this, and the wrench used for this. Now you get tested on filling in those blanks, versus you go out to a car, and you say, this thing is broken. How do we fix it? Well, we need to take that panel off. What do we need? A screwdriver. That's how kids learn. That's one example. Elon also says that why is school so unfun? Why are textbooks so unfun? Video games, kids learn a ton of stuff if they like it. It should be as fun as video games for them. So this is all very logical. When you hear it, you're like, yeah, no, he's not saying anything not obvious, and yet we have a hard time implementing non-obvious things, or obvious things a lot of the time. So I would say, look, if you're a shop teacher, you're already in a world that involves application. I think you need to help the rest of the people in your school be probably more like you, because you're probably one of the only areas where they are actually learning in a memorable way. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you, Tom.
One of the purposes. One of the purposes of this lecture series is to tell stories that are inspiring so that they can be remembered forever. And I think you really did that, Tim. I just have to tell one story from my college experience, and that was a story about Bertrand Russell in his philosophy class teaching Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Russell made the statement that some things were absolutely true, and one of the things he said was, for example, there are no elephants in this room. And Wittgenstein disagreed with him. Tim, this is for you.
Oh, man, thank you.
This is a plaque thanking him for his contribution today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is so fun.
Thank you.